disable the chat. But that's the perfect place to let everybody know where you are and what you're drinking. Like I said, I'm delighted to have a bottle of the non-vintage, which is a great Monday drink. And I'm sat in rather rainy Essex. But Sarah, it looks like you're doing the same with a non-vintage. So cheers.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening, Anna. Cheers. Yes, good evening, everything. I also have a bottle of the non-vintage Boizel, another house favorite of mine too. Hopefully a number of members here will have a nice glass of something ready for this evening's presentation. I know that we're currently offering the 2012 from Boizel en primeur, which is always extremely exciting for us, as we only do en primeur offers with 2 champagne houses, the houses that we work direct with and trust the most implicitly. And we also only ever do en primeur on champagne in really fantastic vintages. And as you know, vintage champagne is only made in good vintages anyway. So it's really a special moment for us to be able to coincide these 2 events. Of course, many of you on the call will also know the range from Boizel very well. We have, of course, the non-vintage, which I'm enjoying. And we also always stock this in halves and magnums, which I know are very popular. The 2008 is still on sale. We have a very small amount left. The 2009 is now live too. And we have the 2004 Joie de France. And of course, in this lovely hot, sunny summer weather that we are having in the UK this year, we have the Rosé non-vintage as well. So I do hope you're enjoying the whole Boizel range. And I'm sure tonight Florent will tell us a little bit more about the full range, but also the 2012. I would love to hand over to Florent at this point, especially because really this champagne house is so special to us. I know that Marcel, my predecessor as buyer for champagne, fell in love with Florent's parents, I think, and their ethos around making champagne, and probably saw Florent as a student at some point over the last 30, 40 years. And we've been working with this family house for a very long time. It's very rare to find a champagne house with some size that is also family owned. And so we're really pleased to be able to work very closely with Boizel. And Florent, I hope that you'll take us away with a little introduction to your house and your champagne. Good evening.
Thank you, Sarah, and bonsoir à tous. I have the privilege myself to be enjoying the Grand Vintage 2012, which has just been disgorged, so it's not ready and released yet to the market. But I think we will talk about it with Sarah a little bit later. So for me, it's a great pleasure for us to have this opportunity, especially as now we cannot come to see you in the UK, or it's difficult. So to have this opportunity to share our family story and our wines and champagnes is, I think, a great opportunity. So as I will start maybe with giving you a little bit of background about our family and our history. We have a long history because our house was founded in 1834. But actually, even before that, our family, the Boizels, were involved in the viticulture and in growing vineyards in Champagne. And the house was founded in 1834 by a couple. That's something very important for us. It was Auguste and Julie Boizel in 1834, who were a young married couple who founded the house. And my mother, Evelyn, who has been president of the house for over 40 years, was very proud of this fact because at the time, beginning of 19th century in France, it was very rare to have a woman who was a founder or co-founder of a business. And at Boizel, from the very beginning, the woman was involved in the running of the business. An interesting fact as well about our founders, Auguste and Julie, they were pâtissiers. They had a small patisserie. I hope you understand patisserie, which was established in Epernay. They were a young couple and they decided, as the champagne business was really growing in success, they decided to start their own house, first by buying grapes to other members of the family. But the house started with no vineyard at the beginning in 1834. One fact that is very important to us as well is that since the beginning, members of the Boizel family have been involved in the winemaking. We are not only president or director of the house, but we are all of us, or nearly all of us, are involved in the viticulture or in the winemaking. And we have the chance to have a size of the house that enable us to be involved from the viticulture to the sales and the relation as well with customers. So Boizel, we are in Epernay, on the Avenue de Champagne. We are what we call a house or négociant in Champagne, meaning that we mostly buy grapes from growers. In fact, today the house vinify the equivalent of about 65 hectares of vineyards. So it's might seem a lot, but in terms of champagne size, it's a relatively small or medium-sized house. And among those 65 hectares, we own about 10%, just over 6 hectares, our own vineyards. As I said before, they are not vineyards that we own at the origin of the house, but vineyards that my parents' generation bought over the years. In our approach to the wines, we don't really make a difference between our own vineyards or the growers. Often I have the question if there is one specific cuvée that is from our own domain and other cuvée from the growers, but in fact, when we do our tastings, it's always done blind, so we don't know if the grapes are coming from our own vineyards or the growers. And that's very important for us, is that it's only the real quality of the wine that dictates the choice that we will make to make the different cuvées. So today we are two brothers running the house since the beginning of 2018. I took over when my parents retired with my brother Lionel. We have been working with our parents, let's say officially, for about 10 years. But of course, we both grew up among the house, and the life of the family and the life of the house are very close. So since our very early age, we were involved, and I've been to the vineyards and played in the cellars all our childhood. So it was really in our blood from the beginning. Today, so I'm the CEO of the house, but one of the important part of my job is the relation with our growers and our vineyards. In fact, just a few hours ago, I was going around our vineyards to check the development and the maturity, because we are getting quite close to the harvest here in Champagne, which is quite unusual. Normally at this time in August, we are all on holiday somewhere near the sea, but this year we are back because the harvest is really about to start. Actually, some people are already picking grapes in Champagne. They have started last weekend in the Aube, so that's the southern part of the Champagne region. But where Boizel doesn't have much vineyard. For us, I think we will start. It's not totally decided yet, but probably I think next Tuesday or Wednesday. Probably starting with the Chardonnay, which are the ripest right now. Sarah, I think I'm going to talk. You can ask if you want to add something about what makes our approach to the winemaking special, or do we go through, the pictures before? Do you want to show a few pictures before, maybe?
I think we have a few photos ready to go, so we'll see if our technical team behind the scenes. Here it goes.
But that's just to give you an idea of where we are if you haven't been. So, as I said, we are located in Epernay on the Avenue de Champagne, which is the main avenue where you find many of the famous houses. So this is a picture of our winery, which has been renovated 2 years ago. In fact, as I said, we have a long history, but in the last 2 years, we have made with the new generation coming, a lot of renovation and investment in the winery. You can see on the left part, maybe you can see through the window the stainless steel tank. That's what we use mostly for the vinification at Boizel. It's probably 95% of our champagnes vinified in stainless steel. And on the right part, maybe you see through the windows the large oak barrels, the foudre, which are quite new to us, because we have started to work in the foudre only for 2 years, since 2018. So it's still an experiment for us, and our idea is not to change the house style, but we have always been looking for new things and improvements, going into more and more details with each generation. So that's what we are doing now with the work with the food. To give you an idea, for the first harvest, we decided in the end not to use any wine that went through the food, because we thought they were the taste of oak was too strong. So we decided not to use this wine in the blend. We used the first wines from the oak, from the foudre, at the last bottling last spring, from the vintage 2019, and we included a very small amount, 1 to 2% in the Brut Reserve. So our approach to the winemaking and what makes Boizel unique, I think first, I already talked about it, is the relation we have with the growers. The fact that at Boizel, we have a very precise knowledge of where the grapes come from, because as we are a family, we have a very long-term relation with our growers. For most of our growers, they have worked with my parents, sometimes with my grandparents. So even if we don't own the vineyards, we have a very precise knowledge of where the grapes are coming from. And I think that's very important. Here you have a picture of the small family. So my brother on the left, Lionel, and then you have my mother Eveline, myself, and my brother, my father Christophe. And here we are in our vineyard in Avis, in the Grand Cru of the Côte des Blancs. Maybe we can go through a few pictures, and I will come back to the winemaking.
A lovely photo, hit that one.
Okay, so same area here. We are in Ménil-sur-Oger, another Grand Cru the Côte des Blancs. Most of our vineyards are on the Côte des Blancs for the Chardonnay and in the Marne Valley for the Pinot Meunier. That's the same vineyard in Avis. So all the vineyards here are planted with Chardonnay. And here you see the foudres that we have bought 2 years ago. So it's 5 foudres, 20 or 40 hectoliters, so quite small size. And our intention is to use them to age our reserve wines, to give them more texture and more creaminess as well.
Florent, would you explain what the reserve wines are? I think there's sometimes confusion around reserve wines and base vintages and the components of champagne. So,
yes, so in Champagne, we do mostly what we call non-vintage blends or wines that maybe we should be calling probably multi-vintage, because in fact, they are a blend of several different years with different qualities and different characteristics. The goal why we do multi-vintages is because our climate in Champagne historically was very difficult to reach ripe and healthy grapes, because we are really on the northern limit where you can grow grapes in France. Nowadays it's improving because of the global warming, but it was the case for many years. And that's why to ensure a consistent quality of the wine and also a consistent style, the Champenois have started to blend different years together. Today at Boizel, to give you an idea, for each harvest, on average, we will put aside up to 20-25%, sometimes 30% of the wines that we will not bottle that year. So, for example, when we make Brut Reserve, which is our main Brut non-vintage, on average, we use 70% of the last harvest. So let's say if we talk about the bottling we have made in spring this year, it was 70% of the harvest 2019, so the last one. And then we take wines from our reserves, so from previous harvest that we have kept in tanks or barriques or food. And we select wine depending on the quality we are looking for to balance the last harvest. And on average, we select about 30% of reserve wines in the blend. In fact, if I can talk now about the Brut Reserve, when we do a Brut, the goal is to reproduce the Boizel style. So when we sit down after the winter, we have all the still wines in front of us from all the different tanks, all the different origin. We already have in mind the style that we want to achieve. But of course, what the nature gives us at the harvest is each year very different, like in any other wine region. So it's by playing with the proportion of reserve wines that we will be able to reproduce the same style and same quality each year. And in fact, there is 3 dimensions with which you can play, let's say. The first one is the origin of the grapes, so from which village, which area in Champagne they come from. The Pinot Noir from the northern side of Montagne de Reims is very different from the Pinot Noir on 20 kilometers away on the southern side of Montagne de Reims. They have totally different personality. So that's one of the dimensions. Then, of course, you have the proportion of the grape varieties, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier. And the third one is the proportion of reserve wines. So that's the 3 dimensions that you can work with to achieve and reproduce each year the same style. At Boizel, we use mostly grapes from the region around Epernay, 30 kilometers around Epernay, historically, with a majority of Grand Cru, Premier Cru for our Chardonnays and Pinot Noir. We also have Pinot Meunier from the Marne Valley, mostly for the Brut Reserve and the Rosé. One particularity also of the house is that we use only the first, what we call the cuvée, or the first pressing of the grapes. So maybe to explain how it works in Champagne, when we press the grapes, the unit is 4,000 kilos, and from that you are allowed to extract about 25 hectoliters. But the first juice you extract, so the first, let's 80%, is what we call the cuvée, which is a juice in the middle of the berry, the purest juice with the most acidity, most freshness. And this is the juice we select for Boizel. Then you have a second pressing, when you press a little bit harder on the grapes, and therefore you extract the juice close to the skin with a little bit more, so lower acidity, a bit more bitterness, a bit more color as well. And this is still used to make champagne. But at Boizel, we make the decision to focus only on the first pressing because we like to age our champagne a long time in the cellar before releasing them. And with the second press, you can also make good champagne, but not necessarily champagne that will age. So that's for this reason that at Boizel, we decide to concentrate 100% on the first pressing. As I said, we like to age our champagne for a long time. For example, the Brut Reserve, which is our youngest champagne, is aged for a minimum of 3 years on lease in the cellar. In Champagne, we have rules for about everything. We like regulation, so there is a limit for non-vintage Brut. Normally, you need to age them for a minimum of 15 months on lease before you release them. So we more than double these minimum requirements for the Brut Reserve and also for the vintage. The minimum aging by law is 3 years, but at Boizel, we always age the vintage between 7 to 15 years on average, with different cuvées. The Grand Vintage that I have here, this has been aged 7 years on lease. But currently, we also sell a Joyau de France, which is our top prestige vintage. And we currently sell the 2004 vintage. So it's a cuvée that has been on the lease for more than 15 years. Does it answer your question, Sarah?
Absolutely. Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem.
No, that was great. I think we've actually had a question in though from members, a little confused still about the reserve wines in cask, because those wines are all used at some point, aren't they? When you're blending across different vintages. How many different vintages will you hold for reserve wines?
Alors, this is we have quite a different approach at Boizel. So this is a choice of the house, but our choice has always been to keep each vintage separated. And at Boizel, we prefer to include in our blends a high percentage of reserve wines, but to keep the reserve wines relatively young. So that means, for example, on average, we have reserve wines dating back to maybe 3 to 4 vintages, no more.
Mm-hmm.
You have other houses who keep reserve wines maybe for 10, for 15 years perhaps, and they will include a tiny percentage in their blend. We prefer to have fresher reserve wines, but work with a higher percentage. And also one important point for us is the fact that we always keep the reserve wine individually by year. You have other producers who might want to each year add a new reserve wine, so blend them together. We prefer to keep 2019, 2018, 2017, and also separated by grape variety in order to really be precise and be able to pick just the quality or the characteristic we want in a specific reserve wines.
Mm-hmm. And of course, that leads it to part of your style, that freshness and brightness, purity, focus on the fruit is around using the younger reserve wines, only the first press, and then aging it for a longer time so that it is more balanced. Would that be fair?
Yeah,
here are your...
it's a combination of all these factors. You see the picture where we age some of the wine, so that's just below the house where I am. We have about 200 years old cellars. So on the picture you see some pupitres. In fact, we still use this pupitre, but this is for a very small part of the production. We like to maintain the know-how of turning the bottle by hand, but the reality is that we also use what we call a gyropalette, which is a machine reproducing the same movement, which is used probably for 99% of the champagne today. But I like to tell it because we don't see that on the picture. So there is a few pictures, I think, of the cellars which I wanted to show. As I said before, we have in the renovation we have made, we have also opened a tasting room and visitor center, which is very new for us in the last 2 years. So nowadays we welcome visitors every day to visit the cellars and taste all the range of Boizel at the wine.
And I imagine, Florent, people will be asking why you've chosen an orange light for the cellar. It's not just because it's very dramatic, is it?
No, well, it helps because it does a nice look.
Of course, of course.
It's a light that protects the wine. If you have a white light, it can give taste to the champagne. Voilà, so the last we are 11 meters below the ground level, which is important because it's unable to have a constant temperature during the year. So the temperature of our cellars is 11 degrees. If you come now during the summer, or if you come in the middle of February, when it's -5 outside, it's still 11 degrees in the cellar. That's very important to have this constant temperature for a good long aging of the wines.
Mm-hmm.
This is a cellar we call Caveau Millésime, where we keep the vintages. So this one is for the young vintage, so the most recent 2019, going back to 1950s. And then you will see probably in the next picture, I believe, our old collection of vintages. Voilà. So this is a small part of the cellar we call the treasure, le trésor. And we are lucky to have probably the oldest collection of champagne. in the region, because maybe you can see on the above, a little bit above, you have 1834. Yeah, this one. Yeah, this is the first vintage produced by the house, by Boizel. It was founded in 1834, and we still have 10 bottles of the 1834 vintage. And this is really something very unique.
I remember, Florent, you told me when you were moving and renovating the cellar, you and your brother carried of these bottles in your own hands into their new storage place. Yes,
with the renovation, we had to relocate this treasure, and which hadn't moved for decades. And it's true, we didn't want to give the responsibility to someone else to move the 1834 and the old bottles. So we did that ourselves. And the story, I don't know, I remember if I told you, Sarah, that doing that, one of the bottle of 1945 got open because the cork was broken. So we had to drink it on the day. It's very hard.
Absolutely. How did it taste?
It was actually, we had tasted it before for a couple of occasions, but it was really, of course, mature, but still very much alive with some freshness. Not much bubbles, nearly no bubbles, but some of these old vintages, when they have been well kept, you can find really good bottles.
Ah, fantastic. This is the end of the stairs. Back up the stairs.
My brother and myself, we are here in the tasting room where you can come, and we have made accessible the whole range. You can come and taste the whole range at the cellar.
That's important, Florent. I know that many members enjoy traveling, and you've very kindly let us suggest that they come to Boizel frequently. But now you're very well set up for it.
Yes, well, we already have members of the Wine Society coming, I know, to the cellar. So nowadays we are much more organized, let's say, for it. Yeah.
Oh, it's very beautiful now. It's a lovely setup that you have. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Are they the photos? Have we come through? I think so.
Yes.
So we have a few questions, Anna. I've just seen you pop up.
I was going to ask you to talk about 2012.
That's the one. I was going to say, Florent, we must talk about the 2012 vintage, because I've been telling members how wonderful it is for a number of years now. Perhaps it's the next big vintage for me after 2008. And yes. So I hear your assessment of 2012 and how the wine came together, what the proportions of the grape varieties were, and all of those sorts of things.
I think first I want to add, if you still have some 2008, first you're very lucky, and I would recommend the members to jump on it, because there is not many 2008 around.
There is a small amount online, so it's a good advice. I have a couple of cases hidden under the bed.
You probably have more than we do now, because it's all gone from the winery. But we always keep, for the top vintages, we always keep stock aside for future tasting, and also for the treasure, for the future generation. So we did that as well with the 2008, but commercially it's not anymore available. And so about 2012, yes, I agree with your view, Sarah. It's 2008 is one of the top vintage in the last decades, and I think 2012 is the one following. 2012 was a quite difficult year in terms of viticulture. It's a year of small yield, which often makes good vintage in Champagne. Small yield because we had a lot of quite severe frosts in the spring. There was also a lot of problems during the flowering period. So in the end, we had a yield which was probably around 20 to 30% lower than average in Champagne. But that year we had no botrytis. Botrytis is very often the challenge in Champagne, because with our climate, which can be humid at the harvest in September, we always struggle between waiting for the optimum maturity and at the same time fighting with the botrytis. So that's always a fine balance. And the years like 2012, when we have absolutely no botrytis and good weather during the harvest, it means that we are able to really wait patiently the perfect moment, the perfect maturity of each of the grape variety. And that's most of the time make an amazing and exceptional vintage. And it was the case in 2012. We harvested the second half of September. So months later, that's what we will do this year, approximately. But really with time to wait the perfect and ideal maturity. So at the same time, we reach good maturity level and maintaining a good level of acidity, which is very important when you want to make a vintage that can last for many years. So for me, 2012 will be a little bit like 2008, a vintage that potentially can be cellared, can be kept for many years. For example, I think you also have 2009. 2009, probably today, I would say, in terms of instant pleasure, will be maybe above these two because it's rich, it's already full of complexity of flavors, but it's not a vintage that I will keep for 10 years, let's say. Whereas the 08 and 2012, or today it's especially 2012, I have it in my glass in front of me. It's still very young, very fresh, but also very precise, and I think it has a long life ahead. And yes, about just the grape varieties for 2012. Yes. So first, maybe to explain the approach compared to a Brut Reserve. I explained before, when we do a Brut Reserve blend, when we sit down to do the tasting and the blending, we already have in mind the style that we want to reproduce. When we do a vintage, it's the opposite. The idea is to express the character of one harvest. So each time we produce a vintage, we are producing a unique wine that is different from the previous vintages. For the winemaker, it's actually probably easier to do a vintage because you are only selecting the best and you don't have to reproduce something. You are just trying to express what the year gave you. And that's what we did in 2012. We decided to work with the 3 grape varieties, which is not always the case in the vintage. For example, in 2008, it was a 50-50 Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. In 2012, we worked with 50% of Pinot Noir, 40% Chardonnay, and 10% Pinot Meunier. So we added a little bit of Pinot Meunier from the village just around Epernay. So it's a very classic blend for Boizel with Pinot Noir, mostly from the northern side of Montagne de Reims, the Chardonnay from the Côte des Blancs, and Pinot Meunier from Cumières, which is a village right next to Epernay.
But would it be right in saying, Florent, that usually the non-vintage from Boizel is Pinot dominant?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last.
Is it usual that the non-vintage Boizel is Pinot Noir dominant?
Yes, the Brut Reserve, around 55% Pinot Noir, with 30% Chardonnay and 15% Pinot Meunier. In general, the house, we can say we are Pinot Noir dominant in our blends. Very often it's the case in the vintage as well. We are between 50 to 60% Pinot Noir. And for the Joyau de France, the top vintage as well, we are usually around 60 to 70% Pinot Noir. That's really much the house style. Even if I think in our cuvée, we have great vineyards in the Côte des Blancs, and the Chardonnay, even if they are not dominant, are loud, I should say, and it's been quite present.
Absolutely. And we have had a lovely comment from Stephen Bourne saying how much his family adore the rosé that you make, the non-vintage rosé that we offer to members. And so given we talked about the non-vintage Brut and the 2012, we should touch a little bit on the rosé. He's asking, how do you make it so special? What makes it so different from you?
First, thank you for the nice comment. And it's true, the rosé has a long history at Boizel, and is also a very important wine for us. Of course, the Brut Reserve is the majority of the volume produced, and the rosé is the second. And nowadays, rosé are quite trendy. But at Boizel, we always had a history of making a high proportion of rosé. Today, our rosé is nearly 20% of the house production, which is very high compared to the champagne standard, which I think is just above 10%. And I think what is different in a rosé is our approach. What we want is first to, for us, it's first a champagne, so it should be elegant, it should have finesse. And secondly, it's a rosé. So it's very important for us to preserve the finesse and the elegance of the champagne. And for this reason, we add a proportion of red wine, which is quite low compared to the average. So it's made by blending red wine with our white still wine. And we add 8%, which is a relatively small proportion. Again, because we want to keep this fruitiness, this freshness, and the natural quality of the champagne. It's also a rosé, like the Brut Reserve. The dosage is relatively low. We are around 8 grams per liter, which makes quite a dry rosé. But this is really the style we want. We want fruit, we want freshness, but not with sweetness.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you, Florent. Anna, I can see you on our screens again. That probably suggests it's over to question time.
We've had lots of questions. We've had absolutely masses. So Florent, I'd like to kick off. It's all right. I think a lot of members were absolutely fascinated seeing your treasure trove. So we've had 3 or 4 questions that are quite similar. So I'm going to group them all together. They would like members would like to know which is the oldest champagne you've ever tasted of the Boizel house, and have you tasted the 1834, or who last did, and is there a tasting note?
So the oldest I've tasted was 1914 from Boizel, and I've tasted 2 or 3 other vintages between 1914 and 1945, probably on 1 or 2 occasions each. I have to say that my mother, Evelyn, has been very protective of the treasure, making sure that we don't open the bottles. And it's only very recently I have the key myself. So, but very often when we open this bottle, it's for a special family occasion. 1 or 2 times it was also for a charity. But as you have seen, we have very old vintages, but in fact very few bottles of each, 10, 20. So we are very careful on when we take the occasion to open some. And also quite often when you want to open a bottle, sometimes you need to open 2 or 3 bottles before you find one that is really in good condition. So of course it's a tough decision to open it because you know you're going maybe to use 2 or 3 bottles.
Yes.
Last part of the question, Anna, maybe I forgot something. No?
When was the last time the 34 was opened? Do you know who had the last bottle?
I have no idea. I've never tasted it myself. I don't think my mother has tasted it as well. My parents, I don't think they have opened it as well. So it's probably it was probably my grandparents, I would say.
Very restrained.
Also, these bottles have always been kept with the original cork. They have never been renewed, which means that they are also very tricky to open nowadays because the oldest bottles have no bubbles left. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we lose a bottle because cork can be damaged.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm sure there's lots of very jealous members out there now wondering what that tasted like. Yeah, a very old one. We have had a question from Julia. She's actually not on the call this evening, but she's going to watch it afterwards. And she would like to know, as I'm sure many members would, how long that you think you should keep your non-vintage champagnes. And I believe we also have a poll up to ask members how long they normally keep their non-vintage champagnes. So members, do enter how long you would normally keep non-vintage, and then Florent, it'd be lovely to hear from you about how long you think they should be kept in bottle.
So to answer the question, say it depends on your taste, on the taste of the customer, because when we release our non-vintage with at least 6 months after the disgorgement, when we consider that it's really ready to drink, and in most cases for myself, I drink the Brut Reserve in the 6 months after its release. It's true that sometimes it can benefit from a few more months. So if you keep it, we have now I can show you maybe on the back label, we have the date of disgorgement written on all the back label. You have the months, in fact, of disgorgement. So it gives you an idea of the age of the non-vintage. And I would say that for me, probably the best time drinking window is between 1 and 2 years from the disgorgement. I think there will be absolutely no problem to keep it for up to 3-4 years, but it of course depend on your taste, because it will start to lose the fresh fruit characters and start its evolution. At the house, of course, we age some of the Brut to taste, and very often at home we have Brut Reserve after 5-6 years, and it changes. It's not the young, fresh, fruity wine, but it's can be also a lovely wine. But I would still recommend to drink it in the first year after release, or maybe buy more, and you can try 1 bottle each month.
That sounds like a good experiment to me, actually. I think Tim's going to make the results of the poll public to see what members said as well. So if you are intrigued to know what your fellow members answered, then I think he's going to make the results. There we go. So we had drink it as soon as I buy it is 17%, and 6 months to a year, 23%, and then 1 to 2 years, 22%. And a few of you keep it 5 years and longer, 6%. So they're the true experimenters in the group. Sounds fabulous. Sometimes
we do this experiment by mistake. You find an old bottle, and I did that recently before holidays. We had a Blanc de Blanc, so non-vintage Blanc de Blanc from Boizel, from the 1992 base vintage, which normally I would never recommend to you to keep for almost 30 years, but I have to say the bottle was absolutely lovely. So sometimes you can have really good surprise.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I know, Anna, that a lot of members seem to buy Boizel's non-vintage, especially towards Christmas, when it may be on usually a little bit of supported offer, and they put it in their reserves and pull out a case that they bought from reserves the year before or the year before that. So there seems to be a little bit of a water flow effect in and out of the cellars of the Wine Society for those members that enjoy drinking non-vintage 1 or 2 years older. Because of course, I think I would have to reply that I drink my non-vintage very quickly when I buy it, mainly because my apartment is a terrible place to age anything. And so if you're going to look after non-vintage champagne and drink it and enjoy it at a later time, it's definitely worth keeping it somewhere with good temperature control.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually. If you don't have a cool cellars, just drink it in the months after buying it. That would be better.
That's always my excuse anyway. I tend to
put it in the fridge and drink it straight away.
The case arrives.
Fantastic. Okie dokes. I think we're going to try and squeeze in a few more questions. We do have time. Catherine, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to ask on your behalf, Catherine Head. I'm actually going to ask it slightly differently as well. She has asked the best temperature for serving vintage champagne, but I would argue, is there a difference? Should you serve vintage champagne and non-vintage at different temperatures, and maybe in different glasses?
Yes, for temperature, we usually recommend for the non-vintage champagne, so the Brut Reserve, the Rosé, a temperature of 8 to 10 degrees. And for a vintage, which has a little bit more richness, a little bit more concentration, we can go up to 10 to 12 degrees. Of course, it's always hard to be very precise with temperatures, but in general, I like to say that it's better to have it a little bit too cold when you first open it, because it will warm, in a few minutes or 10-15 minutes, it will warm quite fast. So it's better to have it a little bit too cold and let it warm in the glass and appreciate the development of the aromas.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We have a question, very topical, I think, and there's sort of two questions actually from two different Peters, Casey and Cousins. In the UK press this week, we've been reading a lot about the extra grapes possibly that will be available through Champagne and due to the lower sales this year, and that the major houses are hoping to limit the yields this year. As a smaller house or a family-owned house like yours, does it affect you in the same way? And how do you think it will affect your relationship with growers?
Yes, it affects us because it's a collective decision. So we cannot make a different decision. Actually, the decision will be made tomorrow morning. So we're waiting for that. But yes, it will affect us. I think from the discussion I have with our growers that most people understand the situation. And in Champagne, there's always been a good sense of collectivity. And the Champagne has been successful because growers and houses have worked together during many crises as well to ensure that the quality of Champagne is always high and recognized. And we know that with the current sales being decreasing, if we set production too high, it will be a problem for some houses to finance it, and it will be a problem of having too much stock. So it's a hard decision, but I think it's a healthy decision for the whole industry of Champagne. So of course we will follow it. It's the only way, and I think it's better to take a decision a bit hard on the short term than not take a decision and push the problem for the future.
Fantastic, thank you. And we've got a question that I think probably leads interestingly into that. Peter Chapman Andrews, obviously Champagne suffered terribly during World War II, and how did Boizel manage to protect their best wines from discovery by opposition forces and have so many amazing old stock left?
Most of them were hidden because they were in the family house, so in the private home of my great-grandparents. The house after the war was totally, we almost started from zero. In fact, at the time, my great-grandfather stayed to run the house. My grandfather was working, was to work in Germany in factories. And my great-grandfather was very old and got sick during the war. So my grandfather was sent back to Champagne to continue to run the house. And when he arrived, he said that there was nearly nothing in the cellar, all broken bottles, so all had been stolen. So it was almost like starting a house from zero again. So it took time, of course, but that's how the old vintages went through the war. It's because they were at the private home and well protected.
Fantastic, thank you very much. We've had a couple of members ask about the Joyeux de France. So what's the difference between that and your vintage, such as the 2012 being released? And will you release a 2008?
Yes, so Joyeux de France is really it's a vintage, of course, but it's a totally different approach to the Grand Vintage. Joyeux de France, it was created with the vintage 1961 by my grandfather, and we only produce it in vintages where we see wines with a great character, a lot of complexity, a lot of power. So for Joyeux de France, we are looking for a style with a lot of vinosity, a lot of power. Whereas for the Grand Vintage, we really adapt to the year. So Joyeux de France is also a different selection. It's only made with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, always from the Grand Cru and Premier Cru, always aged more than 10 years. Currently, we have 2004, which had at least 13 years of aging on lees. And in Joyaux de France, we also have a small part, it can be 10 to 20%, which is vinified in oak barrel. Again, to add more depth, more texture to the wine. So it's really a totally different approach in terms of aging, in terms of selection of the grapes. And to answer, yes, there will be a 2008, which will come right after the 2004. So we are looking at probably end of 2021, I think. But I think we are one of the last house to release the 2008, so we take our time.
I'm pretty sure we'll list it. So, very rare that wine is spectacular. So in a great vintage from you, I'm sure it's going to be wonderful and well worth the wait.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it already, Sarah. Now, Stephen has a question. I'm not sure whether Stephen is being unmuted. Perhaps not. Not a problem. I will ask Stephen's question on his behalf. Florent, what would you recommend eating with your vintage wines, and particularly obviously the 2012 vintage wine? Any food pairings that you can recommend with those older vintages?
There's many food pairings. One with vintage, one thing I particularly like myself is to have something, because you have a wine which is very complex, to have a very simple flavor. So sometimes it can be just one thing. And one of my personal favorites is old Comté, old cheese. It can be Comté also. It works also with Parmigiano, for example. But you have an old, maybe 24, 36 months aged Comté, maybe with a little bit of nice bread and a little bit of butter and a grand vintage. That works really well for me.
That sounds like it's even something I could rustle up. Nice and easy. Just focus on the wine. Wonderful. We have a question from Viv Reynolds, and apologies, we did talk a little bit about it earlier, your relationship with your growers, but she was interested in whether you use the same growers every year. Do you always buy from the same?
Yes, we have a very stable relation. First, in Champagne, it's by law, it's contracted. So it's typically a 5-year contract. In reality, we have contracts because it's a law, but often the contract is in a cupboard, and it's really more the personal relation and the handshake that makes really the relation. But yes, the growers are the same year on year, very often for decades at Boizel. And it's something we try to protect and to continue to keep this relation, because it means that we know how they work in the vineyards. They know the style that we are looking for, and I think we have a really trust relation. They know that we have always been there, even in time of crisis, to buy the grapes. So when we ask them also maybe to wait a little bit for harvest, for them it can be risky if the weather turns bad, they also trust us in that way. So yes, it's very stable, and that's for me a key element of the house.
Thank you. We have a question. I'm going to try and squeeze 2 more in. So Jonathan Gary has asked, do Boizel have any RD champagnes in their range? If yes or no, either way, what are your opinions on that style or method, Florent?
We have nothing called like this, but in fact, if you look at Joyaux de France, for example, Joyaux de France, we disgorge it just before release, 1 year before. Currently, you have a 2004 that has been probably disgorged in 2018. So with 13 years on lease, this is something that other houses could call the RD. For us, it's just a normal release, but it's 13 years on lease is already an old vintage. And maybe to go further on that, we have a project in the coming months, because we often have demand of visitors when they see the very old vintages in the cellar to taste all vintages. So we are planning to release first the vintage 1985 and then a 1990 that has just been disgorged. So that will be more like 30 or even 35 years of aging on these after disgorgement. But this will be a tiny quantity.
Sounds like we might not get any, so I'm crossing my fingers I'll have some chance to try that at one stage, Florent. It sounds absolutely amazing. I'm going to have one more question, and I think there's probably a large amount of members who are wondering the same. But Nicholas Bruce says that he's been to the Boizel house twice to taste your wines, but next time they would come to love to come and look around the cellars. Do they need to book in advance? And could you give a little bit more details on how people can visit?
So we nowadays we have visits every day at the house, but we try to have small groups. So we take currently with COVID, we take a little bit smaller groups, 8 people, but usually it's 12. And when we opened the cellars, we wanted to focus on the good tasting experience. That's why we limit the number of groups. And the visit lasts for about an hour with at least 20 minutes to taste in a room, seated down. You can really take the time to taste the wines. But that means that we are often full. So yes, I would say it's better to book ahead if you want to be sure to have to be able to do the cellar tour. We do, depending on the days, 3 to 5 tours each day, so it's not a lot. So it's better to book in advance, especially for weekends, which are almost always full. And if to book, you can go on the Boizel website, and you have all the contact details and all the timing of the visits.
Brilliant, thank you.
And let us know you are a Wine Society member. When you come, we always have
the special treatment.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I do apologize to members. We've still got questions coming in and we just haven't had time to answer all of them. But please do email us if you've had a question. So you should have received your invite from Tastings at the Wine Society. Please do email us if you're still urging to get your question answered, and we'll pass them on to Sarah and Florent to handle those. It goes without saying how grateful we are to have you here, Florent, especially so close to the harvest. You know, counting down the days, and you're spending your evening here with us. And you only got back from holiday this morning as well, so we've really scooped you in and rushed you into a tasting. So we really are so grateful. There's no rest for the wicked. Yeah. So again, to members who came this evening, a big thank you. Obviously, Sarah has mentioned the 2012 on Primeur launch. So please, again, keep your eyes peeled, take a punt. It's sure to be an absolutely fabulous wine. And I'd like to finish just as a thank you, but as a thank you from a personal point of view, from a member, Florent. David Bryce emailed us in earlier, and he said, it's not a question, but I just wanted to say that your non-vintage cuvée was my celebratory champagne of choice on the 2nd of November 2019, after South Africa won the Rugby World Cup final in Japan. He's going to sit on his case of 2008 vintage for a few years, but it sounds like he just wanted to share with you that Boizel he's shared some lovely moments in his life with Boizel, and I'm sure there's lots of other members with similar stories. I know that certainly Sarah and I are big fans, and we share the same.
Thank you.
I'm embarrassed I finished my glass, but I would like to raise a glass to you, Florent.
Thank you very much.
You're on your second. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for all the nice comments I see on the chat from all the members. It's a great pleasure and give me a lot of energy before the harvest. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes.